Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to today's ILTA YouTube video, The Next Meeting Space, Party on Your Platform. I'm Thomas Witherspoon, Senior System Support Engineer at Sidley, Austin. Our topic today is a follow-up to our previous session where we're just going to discuss tracking cameras and using them to improve the hybrid meeting experience. For this follow-up session, I'm rejoined by Jesse, Tom, and Bill from our previous session, as well as some special guests that I'll introduce here in a moment. Bill, you want to give yourself an introduction right fast?
I'm sure. I am, my formal name is William, but I'm William Grady, or Bill Grady. I'm the Director of IT and Business Operations for Conn, Kavanaugh, Rosenthal, Peisch, and Ford in Boston. And I've been in the legal industry for the better part of the last 20 years, most recently 4 years at Conn, Kavanaugh. From there, I'll hand it off to Jesse.
Thanks, Phil. Jesse Dominguez with FSG Technologies in Dallas, Texas. We are been in the industry for about 29 years now. We've also designed a space for Sidley's new 23 Springs location. We got 5 floors, all with AV. We'll be highlighting a couple of the spaces on their 26th floor location, which is boardroom and an NPR.
Thanks, Jesse. Tom?
Hi, my name is Tom Burns. I'm with a company, AVI Systems. We've just recently changed our name to Forte. I have been in the industry for 38 years as a executive sales system engineer and salesperson, and I'm in the middle of helping customers look for solutions for audiovisual and broadcast applications.
Outstanding. And what I also wanted to bring up in the term of today's topic, we don't want to simply discuss these systems. We wanted to give our viewers kind of an experience of what some of these hybrid meetings look like. So while Jesse and Tom are viewing from their offices, Bill and I are currently in actual meeting rooms. And currently, Bill and I are on the Poly X70 video conferencing hardware. And one of the things to show off is one of the challenges of these systems. We have speaker focus turned on. We also have a couple of special guests. We have, as auto framing catches up, Steve Schenkel, our facilities manager in my Dallas office, and Josue Escobar, technical support specialist for Dallas. And the reason they're here is to give the viewers the flavor of, as actual normal meetings happen, as people, as Josue has already had to run into, are called out of a room on a call, come in and out, how do the cameras react? How do they track what's going on? What are the strengths and weaknesses of that? So I'm going to switch mine to speaker focus, which you're going to notice was earlier set, and one of its limitations is if everyone goes silent, it decides to start listening to the whole room, at which point we get to see Josue doing a little dance over on the side. I think as far as going back to kind of the tour topic, one of the things people are always curious about is how are these cameras actually tracking people? Jesse or Tom, you want to take that?
Sure. So the way that these cameras that you're looking at now are currently tracking them, they're using their mic array to kind of track where the speech is coming from, and then it's switching away from that preset zoom to a more overall zoom. At the end of the day, you've got one static shot and you're doing some digital zooming. There are some higher end cameras that are available. What we have now is we have the ability to do a lot of processing with multiple camera shots and with PTZ cameras that have the ability to zoom in, out, pan, and find the speakers in the room. I do have a drawing that I can kind of show here that kind of lays out how they're going to be laid out for Sidley. You see that okay, guys?
Yep.
Okay, so in this scenario, we've got a large boardroom that's separable. There's going to be a wall that's able to come down here, so it can be 2 separate ones. If you notice here, we've got cameras located on either side of displays. There are also projectors that would show up in the overhead view for reflected ceiling plan. And you also notice that there's cameras at the back. We've duplicated that ×2 because this is a space that's separable. And the reason that we have multiple cameras in the same spot is pretty much necessary to be able to do a find, track, and take function that's available through these newer systems. Now, this is just kind of an overview. We'll go more in depth, and we'll even have a recording where we're showing the actual systems at Sidley. And so knowing that you have camera angles, multiple camera angles, and multiple locations is going to give us the ability to take shots from each corner and front on. The idea is to be able to catch and frame every person that's in this boardroom. And that way on the far side of the call that you would be watching, you'd be able to see all of these different angles. What I've got also here to kind of show is a video. This video is from QSC. QSC has a system called Sear Vision, and Sear Vision was a Swiss company that was, I think, started back in 2009, and they were acquired by QSC not too long ago, just a few years ago. And they really did spend a lot of time and really come up with some great modeling software. Their capabilities with cameras is just, it's unmatched. There's other companies that are also doing some of the same things, but we can kind of show a little video that they have here. Got it muted. It's going to show a professor kind of walking along, and the highlight of this video is to show the different zones. If you'll notice here on the left, there's a trigger zone, and once that person's been recognized, now it's framed around them. And the zones that you create in the software give you the ability to automate some of the functions of the cameras. Now, this is showing the 2-camera model. One camera is, as you can see, framed in to a larger part of the room. This is the whole presentation area where they're going to be walking side to side. The camera that you're actually seeing and being followed is a separate camera. And that's an important piece, because if you're doing a little more detailed following or tracking of the speaker, it really is necessary to have those multiple cameras so that they can work in tandem together to kind of help do the framing. You'll notice here they're showing another framing area. When they walk into this container, what they're doing is they're killing the other tracking, and then they're kind of remaining in this area, and that's all programmed, you know, with the commissioning of the system. And they're just demonstrating what happens when they leave those containers. This is part of the AI functionality, but they're going to go into a little more detail and kind of show how the AI software is running in the background. They're recognizing that that's a person. They're recognizing that it's a particular person. I think as we move forward with, you know, innovation on this side of this technology and the software, they're going to be able to track which person it is and what his name is, and even be able to present other software in there. Now, here's another tracking zone. And once they enter that tracking zone, they know to leave the tracking and just kind of fall back to the original position. This is just an example, one of the ways that this can be done. Just towards the end of the video, they just kind of bring them back into the shot without all the triggered zones being shown, and kind of give you an indication of that. But these are the systems that we are using at Sidley, and just kind of an indicator of what we
brings up it. You know, these poly systems do a much more limited version of that. A lot of systems run kind of analogously. Crestron, Biamp have similar ones. Jabra does as well. So, you know, in the example of, I've got this set on, you know, speaker focus. If I switch it to, actually, if I just get up and start walking around the room, it's actually going to try to track me. Now, instead of doing the camera panning, the poly system only has 2 cameras attached to it. So it's doing jump cuts, trying to follow me around the room. And it does a pretty decent job of it as long as you give it time to catch up. So I think that does bring up something that people need to take into consideration as we're training our end users on this. Don't go running, screaming around the room expecting it to catch up. There's a little bit of, it needs to follow who you are. this also brings up one of the limitations of just putting a camera bar at the front of the screen, and where Al has an advantage. If I start having a conversation with Steve, I'm suddenly staring off camera for this conversation, whereas if you've got a camera at the front of the room and a camera on the table, it will realize, oh, I'm looking over here through the facial recognition part of it, and go, I need to switch to the camera on the table so I can get a better shot of Thomas talking to Steve across the table, so you're not getting that profile view of the side of my head.
Yeah, can I just offer that's particularly problematic when you only have the front-facing camera, if you have anybody at a podium. Basically, I'm sure we've all been in a room somewhere where there's somebody with a podium at the front of the room where you're suddenly seeing mostly podium and basically just the side of a person, and it just makes it all the harder to actually follow the speaker. Yep.
Yeah.
I'd like to think that a lot of situations where, especially any folks that are watching this podcast, you're dealing with more conference space, boardroom type, multiple person spaces where you do have folks facing in different directions. And that really, highlights the importance of having different camera angles. Typically, we have this one camera angle that we see a lot, but I see in the future, we're seeing it a lot, that there are, definitely needs for multiple camera angles because there are larger spaces. These camera systems don't just have to be for the large, massive boardrooms like the one I just showed on the screen. They can also be for smaller spaces, and I think that's where the technology is running.
Yeah, because while QSC is certainly the high end, we are seeing that trickle down to systems like Polycom, whereas the QSC system requires a substantial level of integration and programming. For the Polycom that you're seeing here today, we just turned it on. There was no particular coding or programming done. It's figuring out on its own where we're at. One of the other things that these systems are capable of is multi-focus, where it's figuring out where everyone in the room is and putting them in their own little box. Now, while this is fine for 3 people here, if there were 4, 5, 6 people in this room, you can see where this gets pretty overwhelmed in a hurry, because we have one participant section that is putting us all into, and it's a limitation of these systems. Now, there is a multi-stream option, which Polycom is capable of, where it takes the room, sends the stream out, and then gives us each our own box. And this option does start chewing into the processor on these polys, but it does give a much more comfortable we're heads in our offices as opposed to sitting around a conference room table, even though you have the perspective. The limitation here is obviously all of our sound is coming through the main connection as opposed to highlighting each of us individually if we were talking.
Yeah, maybe that's something I could kind of highlight real quickly.
Yeah.
You mentioned the microphones at the front of the room. One of the things I didn't mention earlier is that we also have the capabilities, especially in systems like this, to locate microphones, multiple microphones, really high-end microphones throughout the space, not only to be able to accurately capture everyone's speech, but also to use that information and those coordinates for these AI camera tracking systems. So not only do you get the benefit of the multiple camera angles and the more streamlined view for the far side, but you also get, I believe, a much improved audio fidelity for these calls. And that's ultimately very, very critical for everyone to be able to understand what's being said, and to also be able to understand what's being said in the room as well as on the far side.
Because that's certainly another factor on a lot of these systems, is these systems all have their limitations. These poly systems, and the manufacturers are trying to do the best they can, but they also are sometimes giving a little bit bigger spec than these things can actually support. For example, on this poly system, it's got an effective range of about 15 feet from that front camera for it to sort out facial recognition and audio recognition. Now, we're currently supplemented by another microphone sitting here on the table in front of us. Otherwise, you'd start hearing a little bit of audio degradation, but what I've run into is sometimes, I'm gonna switch it back to speaker focus. If I start moving to the back of the room I've had it starts glitching out on me if I'm up against this back wall at about 17, 18 feet. And of course, as I'm talking about, it's keeping up with me. But I've certainly had it glitch out and go to a full room shot in the middle of conversation when I'm in the room by myself. So that's something to take into consideration as you're planning your spaces, is to make sure you're sizing your equipment appropriately. And it gets back to something that we, talked about previously. If it's at all possible, either have a rapport with an integrator like Forte or FSG, or even a good relationship with your CDW supplier or your tech supplier, to either get a good return policy or get some loaner equipment in and actually test it out in the space. Because if you buy the wrong size, it may end up, not able to focus on the far end of your table. If you buy too large, you may end up, with this overwhelming clunky thing up front, in a small petite room. So sizing appropriately is certainly a challenge.
Can I also just add to that, I volunteer Tom to add to that, because I know we've talked about before, fundamentally the ability to go in and see the actual technology somewhere before you go to deploy it live.
It is in there. Our company is kind of modeled our branch offices throughout the United States as experience centers, and so we take best of breed, conferencing technologies and put them in the various rooms that we have. So it is possible to see divergent technologies pulled together, and it's demonstratable. As an example, our training room here, has not one, but three demonstratable camera technologies all jammed into one training room. So we can show, a QSC solution, a Crestron solution, a Yealink solution, and they all operate a little bit differently. But the one thing I think is most important is how the audio is treated in any given space. And to Thomas's point, sizing a room, where the distant participant is in the room. A lot of these manufacturers, camera bars, have a stated spec as to how far they're going to pick up the audio within the room. And then sometimes you just have to augment with a table microphone or a ceiling microphone. So audio is the primary importance. Camera angles are definitely on the rise, and people are looking for these various solutions that create meeting equity for those in the space as they go.
Definitely. We've kind of covered some topics on things that we should coach end users on as they're using these spaces. Are there any other items that you really think we should probably plan on coaching people on as we start integrating these into our spaces?
I think an important part is to kind of familiarize yourself with the devices. Most of the manufacturers have multiple sets of videos online that kind of get you familiarized.
Yeah, as we run into a limitation
with
of
it, like the one I
Zoom
just
and
showed
Jesse
earlier.
freezes.
Not only right sizing the room, but once you've kind of narrowed it down.
Yeah. The other thing that is possible is to
as soon as you're able to get it.
Right. What was that, Tom?
Yeah, the other thing I was going to say, it is feasible and with many vendors to experience their platforms in the form of a web demonstration. So they will set up a call. They'll be in their office. You'll be on your computer or your office, and then you can have an interaction, and they can show you the multi-tiered options that they have with their technologies, demonstrate tracking and different audio solutions. So it doesn't. Yeah, it's great to go to a space and see different things, but all of the major manufacturers are capable of remote demonstration.
Definitely.
Nice.
And I think that also leads up to kind of the last thing I wanted to cover. And, as great as the new technology is, what are some times where that speaker tracking is actually not going to be appropriate? What are some times where we would want to say, hey, we're just going to shut this down and go with an old-fashioned, still shot from a camera? And one of those, certainly, the room I'm currently in, because while I have, the luxury of the fact that this wall, while it's glass, is frosted, if you happen to end up with unfrosted glass out there, anytime someone's walking down the hallway, that's very likely for a camera to pick up and go, oh, there's another person in the room. Oh, the person's left the room. What other situations would anybody kind of run into where we want to make sure it's off?
Can I offer probably depositions or something along those lines if there's a court reporter or somebody in the room, to follow their guidelines with regard to probably fixed camera locations as opposed to having something that's jumping continuously through frames?
Yeah, and certainly in that situation where you've got just the deponent needs to be the only one on camera, anyone else in the room really doesn't quite matter nearly as much as that deponent does. Or
Yeah,
really,
typically a huddle space is not going to require it because of the wide angle view of the camera. Everybody's in the shot and it's intimate anyway, so that would be an application wouldn't really be needed.
right. And certainly there are small, using poly as a continued example, there's smaller versions in this X70 series hardware. There's a V12, there's an X50 kind of designed more for huddle rooms that do have some of these same features. But to Tom's point, a lot of the times you're sitting shoulder to shoulder as opposed to spread out like we are here in Dallas, in which case speaker tracking, it's not much for it to actually track.
Yeah. I'd have to agree with that. Any of your stationary type situations where you have rooms like huddle rooms or, the hybrid type spaces that don't have a lot of movement in them, probably is not necessary to have a whole lot of tracking happening. Tracking is really for spaces that you have people up and moving around, or you have so many folks that you want to be able to grab their, where that facial part of the call, where you want to see somebody's face and see their reactions, that becomes important to maybe consider upgrading. It's just all about the use. It's all about the space. It's right sizing.
Very true. And with that, I think we've kind of hit most of the bullet points that we wanted to hit in this. Let's just kind of, run around the horn right fast and see if there's any kind of closing thoughts. Tom, do you have any closing thoughts on the topic?
No, I think we covered most of the main topics and that are salient, and but there's always the technology is always changing, and it's this is a forum that should probably be revisited at least every 6 months because the technology does change.
The technology definitely changes that quickly on some of the. Jesse, any thoughts from you on closing out?
I think one of the things that kind of keeps popping up, and maybe it's kind of leading us into the next video that we'll do, is really we want to show different types of spaces. We want to talk about usage, and we want to talk about how the technology can be best placed in those spaces to serve you best, because it's really about what you need it to be, those spaces. So it's worthwhile to have that conversation with your internal AV folks, even your IT folks, and if you can hire an AV integrator that can really kind of walk you through, here's 10 different options that you can look at. And it's really about making that space as useful as possible, making the most use of time.
Bill, how about you? Any thoughts from you?
Just to build on what Jesse said, fundamentally, just do your research, basically decide how you want to use your rooms, and then basically see what the technology is that'll fit your needs, and then try to move forward from there.
Excellent. Well, I'd like to thank everybody for their time. I'd like to remind everyone watching this to join in the discussion either in the comment section or on iltonnet.org. Thank you all for your time and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.